Brenda wasn't just any homeowners association member, she was the HOA. At least that's how she saw herself. With her signature fluorescent pink visor, clipboard, and an ever-present latte in hand, Brenda patrolled the neighborhood like a hawk searching for prey. Her mission? To protect the sanctity of the community, even if it meant enforcing rules that didn't exist. The community newsletter, which she personally edited and distributed, was filled with passive-aggressive reminders, like, residents are kindly reminded that blue trash bins clash out with our neighborhood aesthetic. Please use green bins only. Brenda considered it her duty to uphold standards, no matter how petty. Enter Jake, a young, easygoing homeowner who had recently moved into the neighborhood. Jake was everything Brenda despised: casual, unbothered, and worst of all, non-compliant with her arbitrary rules. Jake's mailbox was a modern black design, which Brenda declared was an affront to the neighborhood's charm. She wasted no time in introducing herself, clipboard in hand, to let him know the mailbox would have to be replaced. "Welcome to the community. I noticed your mailbox doesn't align with HOA guidelines," Brenda chirped with a thin smile. "Guidelines?" Jake asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes," Brenda replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's a little too bold. We prefer something more traditional, like white with decorative posts." Jake chuckled. "I'll think about it," he said, knowing full well he wouldn't. Brenda's crusade wasn't limited to mailboxes. The HOA rules she enforced were absurdly specific. Grass had to be cut to precisely 2.5 inches. Driveways could only be pressure washed on Thursdays, and Halloween decorations were allowed, but had to be removed by November the 2nd at 10 o'clock a.m. sharp. Brenda's favorite activity was issuing violation notices, which she left tucked into mailboxes or taped conspicuously to front doors. The notices were always signed HOA Compliance Officer, a title Brenda had given herself. Jake watched his neighbors scramble to comply with Brenda's whims, from repainting fences to replanting hedges, and couldn't help but feel sorry for them. Still, he figured he could fly under the radar if he kept his head down. That was until Brenda discovered the strip of land at the edge of his property, a discovery that would ignite a neighborhood war. Jake thought he had found his dream home, peaceful, cozy, and far from nosy neighbors. But what he didn't know was that his property came with a small strip of land bordering the community park. This narrow path, which barely qualified as a dirt trail, had somehow become a shortcut for HOA residents. Brenda, of course, was the self-proclaimed guardian of this so-called shortcut. In her mind, it was practically a community lifeline. Jake first noticed the issue one lazy Saturday morning when a jogger casually trotted across the strip. Then came the dog walkers, followed by cyclists. By the next weekend, it looked like rush hour on a highway. Jake scratched his head, watching the parade of trespassers. "Is there a toll I'm not charging?" he muttered to himself. Still, being the easygoing guy he was, Jake decided not to make a fuss. Maybe it's just a one-time thing, he thought. He couldn't have been more wrong. One fateful morning, Jake decided to post a small sign that read, "Private property. Please do not trespass." He figured a polite reminder would be enough to deter the traffic. But no sooner had the sign gone up than Brenda showed up on his doorstep, armed with her clipboard and an air of righteous indignation. "Jake," she began, with a tone that was equal parts condescension and menace, "we need to talk about that sign you've put up." "What about it?" Jake asked, leaning against his door frame with a bemused smile. Brenda thrust the clipboard forward like it was evidence in a courtroom. "This path has been used by the community for years. It's practically public property." Jake raised an eyebrow. "It's on my deed. Pretty sure that makes it private property. Brenda scoffed. Well, in this neighborhood, we value community access. That sign sends the wrong message. Jake bit back a laugh. Brenda, it's just a sign. You're acting like I built a moat. Her eyes lit up. Don't give me ideas, she snapped, before storming off. The next week, the situation escalated. The sign had only emboldened the trespassers. Now, instead of quietly using the strip, they strutted through it as if making a statement. Jake even caught one jogger pausing to take a selfie in front of the private property sign, posting it with the caption, "Some people think they own the world. LOL. Things hit a boiling point when Jake returned home one evening to find tire tracks gouged into the strip. It seemed someone had decided to drive through it like they were testing a monster truck. That's it, Jake muttered, surveying the damage. If they won't respect the sign, I'll give them something they can't ignore. Jake decided it was time for a fence. Nothing too fancy, just a simple barrier to mark his property line and end the nonsense. He called a contractor, ordered supplies, and scheduled the installation. When the workers arrived, Brenda was lurking nearby, glaring at them like a hawk watching its prey. She marched over, clipboard in hand, and declared, "This construction is unauthorized. You can't just build a fence without HOA approval." Jake smiled sweetly. "Brenda, the HOA doesn't own this land." "I do. You'll regret this," she hissed, stomping off in her neon-pink sneakers. By the end of the week, the fence was up, complete with a sturdy gate and a fresh coat of paint. Jake added a second sign for good measure. "No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted." Brenda's reaction? She stood outside the gate, arms crossed, muttering to herself like a villain, plotting her next move. Jake watched from his porch, sipping coffee and thinking, let the games begin. The day after the fence went up, Jake woke up to a sound that could only be described as a car alarm, crossed with a banshee's wail. He stepped outside to find Brenda standing in front of the gate, honking her car horn like she was summoning the HOA cavalry. "Jake!" she shouted, waving her clipboard like a white flag that wasn't actually white. "This fence is a direct violation of HOA policy. Open this gate immediately." Jake, still holding his coffee mug, leaned on the fence casually. "Brenda, it's 8 a.m. on a Saturday. What could possibly be this important?" Brenda marched up to the gate, her visor slightly askew from the effort of her rage. "This path is vital for the community. You're blocking access, and that's illegal." Jake took a sip of his coffee. "It's not illegal if it's my property." "Brenda, do you even know what the word trespassing means?" "Don't get smart with me," she snapped. "I'm on the HOA board. We'll see about this." Brenda wasn't about to let Jake win. That afternoon, he found a bright yellow HOA violation notice taped to his fence. The handwritten note claimed he owed a $500 fine for unauthorized construction. Jake laughed so hard he nearly spilled his coffee. "Nice try, Brenda," he muttered, taking the notice inside and tacking it onto his fridge like a trophy. Over the next few days, Brenda escalated her efforts. She rallied a small group of HOA loyalists who began spreading rumors about Jake. She even tried to send landscapers to remove the fence under the pretense of community maintenance. But Jake was quick to shut that down. Each attempt only strengthened Jake's resolve. "If Brenda wants a war, she picked the wrong guy," he said to himself as he installed security cameras around the property. Brenda's breaking point came when she realized Jake wasn't backing down. One sunny afternoon, Jake spotted her pacing outside the gate, her phone pressed to her ear. Moments later, 2 police cars pulled up. Jake sighed, setting down his book. "Here we go. The officers approached Jake looking slightly embarrassed. "We got a call about a blocked public road," one of them said. Jake chuckled, gesturing to the fence. "This isn't a public road. It's private property, and I can prove it." He handed over his property deed and a copy of the township map, both clearly marking the strip as his land. The officers nodded, satisfied. Brenda, who had been hovering nearby, interjected loudly, "But it's been used as a shortcut for years. That makes it public." The officer turned to her, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Ma'am, that's not how property rights work. This is private land, and he has every right to restrict access." Brenda's face turned beet red. "This isn't over," she screeched before stomping back to her car. Jake waved at her retreating figure with a smirk. "Have a great day." News of the incident spread quickly. Some neighbors supported Jake, quietly thanking him for standing up to Brenda. Others, loyal to the HOA, whispered that he was disrupting the harmony of the neighborhood. Jake didn't care. He installed another camera for good measure and added a sarcastic sign to the gate. "Private property. Trespassers will be hugged by the dogs." Despite Brenda's tantrums, the fence stood firm, and Jake was just getting started. Brenda wasn't one to accept defeat quietly. Within days of her 911 call fiasco, Jake received a formal letter inviting him to an HOA meeting. The subject? His unauthorized gate and obstruction of community access. Jake rolled his eyes. "Of course she's taking this to a kangaroo court," he muttered. The meeting was set for the following week, and Jake, being the resourceful guy he was, came prepared. He brought a folder filled with evidence, property deeds, security footage, and even screenshots of Brenda's bogus violation notices. "If Brenda thinks she's got me cornered, she's in for a surprise," he said with a smirk. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige room that perfectly matched Brenda's personality. As Jake walked in, he noticed Brenda sitting at the head of the table, her clipboard clutched like a scepter of authority. The room was filled with HOA board members, a few neighbors, and of course, Brenda's loyal minions. She wore a smug expression as if victory was already hers. The meeting began with the HOA president, a balding man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, introducing the issue. "Today, we're discussing the matter of Mr. Jake's fence, which has caused some concerns regarding community access." Brenda immediately jumped in. "It's more than just a concern. He's disrupted the entire neighborhood. That strip has been a vital pathway for years, and now he's selfishly blocked it off." Jake raised his hand. "If I may?" The president sighed. "Go ahead." Jake stood calmly, placing his folder on the table. "First, let me clarify something. This strip of land is not, and has never been, community property. It's private property. I own it. Here's the deed to prove it." He slid the document across the table. A few board members leaned in to inspect it, nodding in agreement. Brenda's smugness faltered. "But it's been used as a shortcut for years. That makes it a community easement." Jake smiled. "Actually, no. There's no easement recorded in any public documents, and just because people have trespassed doesn't make it their right." To drive his point home, Jake pulled out security footage showing various neighbors, including Brenda herself, blatantly trespassing. The room erupted in murmurs as Brenda's face turned crimson. Brenda, refusing to back down, tried one last-ditch argument. "This is about the community. We can't let one person disrupt everyone else's convenience." Jake chuckled. "Convenience doesn't outweigh property rights, Brenda. And for the record, your so-called community didn't seem too concerned when tire tracks tore up my yard." The board president, clearly tired of the drama, raised his hand. "Enough. Brenda, we've seen the evidence, and it's clear this land is not HOA property. We have no authority here." Brenda slammed her hands on the table. "You're all cowards. This isn't over." But the other board members weren't having it. One of them, an elderly woman named Margaret, piped up, "Brenda, maybe it's time we let this go. We're making fools of ourselves." The room fell silent. Brenda looked around, realizing her allies were abandoning ship. The meeting concluded with the board formally acknowledging that Jake's property was his alone, and that the HOA had no jurisdiction over it. As Jake gathered his things, Brenda stormed out, muttering something about higher authorities. Jake couldn't resist a parting shot. "Good luck with that, Brenda." The room erupted in laughter as Brenda made her dramatic exit. Jake walked out, feeling triumphant, knowing he had outwitted her at every turn. Just when Jake thought it was over, Brenda proved she wasn't one to give up easily. A week after the HOA meeting, he received another letter, this time from Brenda's personal lawyer. The letter threatened legal action, claiming Jake's fence violated an unwritten community easement and demanding its removal. Jake burst out laughing as he read the letter. Unwritten easement? Is that a legal term? Or did she just make it up during her morning yoga session? Not wanting to leave any loose ends, Jake forwarded the letter to his own lawyer. A day later, his lawyer called him back, sounding more amused than concerned. "Jake, this is a textbook example of bluffing. She doesn't have a case. Relax and enjoy your coffee." Jake smirked. "Oh, I plan to." Brenda, undeterred by her lawyer's lack of results, took matters into her own hands, literally. Late one night, Jake's security cameras caught her sneaking onto his property with a pair of bolt cutters. The footage showed Brenda struggling with the lock on the gate, muttering angrily to herself. After a few minutes, the bolt cutters slipped and she fell backward into a flower bed. Jake couldn't believe what he was seeing. He saved the footage, thinking, "This is gold." The next morning, Brenda acted as if nothing had happened, waving cheerfully at Jake from her driveway. Jake waved back, suppressing a grin. Jake decided it was time to expose Brenda's antics to a wider audience. He contacted a local news station that specialized in covering HOA disputes and property rights. After hearing his story, the station eagerly agreed to do an interview. A few days later, a camera crew arrived at Jake's house. He shared everything: the property deed, the security footage, and Brenda's over-the-top behavior. "She's treated my private property like it's her personal shortcut," Jake explained. "And when I said no, she declared war." The segment aired that evening, complete with the hilarious footage of Brenda's failed bolt cutter mission. The title? When HOA Rules Go Too Far, One Homeowner's Fight for His Rights. The news story went viral, and Brenda's reputation took a nosedive. Neighbors who had once sided with her began to distance themselves. Some even knocked on Jake's door to apologize for their earlier behavior. "I didn't realize how out of control she was," one neighbor admitted sheepishly. Brenda, meanwhile, was furious. She tried to rally the HOA for support, but the board, still reeling from the meeting, wanted nothing to do with her. A week after the news aired, Jake received a formal letter from the HOA. It was an apology, signed by the board president, acknowledging Brenda's overreach and confirming that no further action would be taken against Jake or his fence. The letter also revealed that Brenda had been asked to step down from the HOA board. "Her actions don't reflect the values of our community," the letter stated. Jake couldn't help but laugh. "Guess the HOA finally found its backbone," he said, tacking the letter onto his fridge alongside Brenda's fake violation notice. Brenda's dramatic downfall left the neighborhood buzzing for weeks. The once overbearing queen of the HOA had become the butt of every joke. Her attempt to control Jake's private property and the viral news coverage had tarnished her self-made reputation. Soon after the HOA meeting, Brenda quietly put her house on the market. The sign went up one Monday morning, and by Friday, she was gone. Neighbors exchanged knowing smiles, their lawns never looking greener without Brenda inspecting them for infractions. Jake couldn't help but chuckle when he noticed her moving truck blocking the street, a direct violation of Brenda's favorite HOA rule. The irony was too delicious to ignore. With Brenda gone, the HOA softened its stance. The board, now free of her overreach, sent out a revised newsletter with a refreshing tone. Let's focus on what really matters, building a friendly, cooperative community. Jake even noticed a few neighbors reaching out more. The same people who had once whispered behind his back were now waving and saying hello. Some even stopped by to apologize for their earlier complicity in Brenda's schemes. "I'm sorry for believing her," said one man as he handed Jake a plate of cookies. "We all just went along because she was so persistent." "No hard feelings," Jake replied with a grin. "But if you ever see someone with bolt cutters around my fence, maybe give me a heads up." One evening, Jake sat on his porch, sipping coffee and enjoying the tranquility that had eluded him for months. The gate, his silent protector, stood proudly at the edge of his property. The private property sign gleamed in the fading sunlight, a symbol of his victory. Jake couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of the whole ordeal. Who knew a strip of land could cause so much drama, he mused. But beyond the humor, Jake realized the deeper lesson. Standing up for yourself, even against the loudest, most entitled voices, is worth it. To commemorate Brenda's reign of chaos, Jake added a small, tongue-in-cheek sign beneath the original private property notice. It read, "This land is a Brenda-free zone." The next morning, he found a sticky note on his mailbox from one of his neighbors. It simply said, "Best sign ever." Jake smiled, knowing that his peaceful suburban life was finally back on track. Brenda-free and chaos-free. Brenda's departure from the neighborhood was swift, but not unnoticed. As her moving truck blocked the street, ironically violating her own HOA bylaws, Jake watched from his porch with a steaming mug of coffee. A neighbor walking by joked, "Think she left a note for herself about the truck?" Jake laughed. If only. With Brenda gone, a sense of relief swept through the community. It wasn't just about the fence or the rules, it was about reclaiming peace from the chaos Brenda had created. Under new leadership, the HOA took a drastically different approach. The new president, Ed, focused on harmony over hostility. Rules became guidelines, violations turned into friendly reminders, and community events brought people together instead of dividing them. Jake noticed neighbors becoming more relaxed. Driveways had mismatched cars, lawns were slightly overgrown, and porch decorations actually reflected personalities. The neighborhood was finally becoming what it should have been all along. A home, not a battleground. One day, Jake received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a small plaque engraved with the words, "The man who stood against Brenda." Attached was a note. "Thanks for showing us how to stand up for ourselves. We owe you more than cookies." Jake placed the plaque on his mantle, shaking his head with a grin. "I didn't sign up to be the neighborhood hero," he muttered. Months later, as Jake was pruning his garden, he noticed a car slowing near his gate. His stomach dropped momentarily. Was Brenda back? But instead of stopping, the driver rolled down their window and waved. "Nice fence," they shouted with a grin before driving off. Jake laughed, realizing that the gate had become a symbol not just of his victory over Brenda, but of standing firm against overreach. Over time, The neighborhood fell into a comfortable rhythm. The fence remained standing tall and proud, and Jake became a quiet legend in the community. Whenever someone complained about rules or enforcement, a neighbor would chuckle and say, "At least it's not Brenda running the show." Jake added one final touch to his property, a small, humorous sign that read, "For peace of mind, trespassers will be met with sarcasm." It became a neighborhood favorite, and even Ed admitted, "That's the kind of rule we can all get behind." Valuable lesson. This story reminds us of the importance of standing up for ourselves and our rights. One voice, one person, can create lasting positive change. Do not allow anyone to bully you. Have you ever encountered a Brenda in your community? Share your stories in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming and inspiring content.